Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Zignoni. I am an assistant professor at Northwestern University with the Cook Family Writing Program. Before that, I was a PhD student at UC Davis, where I became acquainted with the UC Davis Mapping Project, first begun by Chris Tice and Tara Porter. Since that time, since the 2006 and 2008 survey, I have worked with Chris to disseminate a newer survey. And today I'm going to speak with you about the results from that survey. But first, let's go back in time just a bit. Let's look at the 2006 to 2008 approach that Chris and Tara took. It was similar to the McLeod and Shirley survey, which was done in 1987. And similar meaning that the questions focused on institutional size and type, sources of WAC funding, number of years the program was in existence, the components of the WAC program, and also curricular elements. It assumed a history of WAC at many schools. It reworded and made new questions to reflect the maturity and elaboration of the WAC and WID concepts over 20 years, with a nod to the influence of new technologies. And such questions focused on characteristics like the program director, program assessment, and the importance of digital technology. After results were analyzed from the 2006 to 2008 survey, new questions and concerns arose. So the 2015/2020 survey was created both to address these new questions and concerns and to provide a look at WAC-WID nearly 10 years later. The 2020 survey also asked questions about, or asks questions because it's currently ongoing, about the effect of the pandemic. 498 institutions responded. And before I begin, because what I'm going to be doing is going into results, I just want to talk to you a little bit further about this survey. I began this survey as a nascent graduate student, nascent PhD student in 2015. And I took a break in 2016 when my dissertation led me elsewhere. And so there was a short gap between 2016 and 2019. The results that you're going to be looking at today were collected from 2015 to 2020, with that little gap in between. And that gap is important because that's going to lead us to the current ongoing efforts at gaining results. We'll talk about that towards the end of this presentation. The most important thing to know is that there was a little gap in between, but these results came to us over a period of 5 years from 2015 to 2020, and 498 individual institutions responded to the survey. So here's a map of what we found out from the 2015 to 2020 survey. And you can see that the yellow states 1 to 3 programs reported having WAC-WID initiatives. The turquoise or light blue states 4 to 6 programs reported initiatives. The spring green states had 7 to 10 initiatives. 11 to 15 the orange states had 11 to 15 initiatives. Pennsylvania, the purple state, had 16 to 20. The dark green state over there, California, had 21 to 25. And of course, the burgundy state, New York, had 26 to 30. Now, that's not to say that there aren't more. It's just to say that these are the institutions that responded, and these are the number of initiatives that were reported in each state. So you can kind of see the layout there. And I should also say that the white states reported no programs. So let's look at what this means. One thing that I discovered in these results is that the disparity between institutions which have WAC programs has lessened since 1987. Prior to 2008, more institutions reported not having WAC programs than actually having them. Starting in 2008, this switched, a metric that remained the same in 2020. More institutions now report having WAC programs than not having them. Many programs have been in place for over 20 years, but many new programs are forming every year. In fact, there have been slightly more programs formed in the last 5 years than programs which have run for over 20 years. So this is an initiative that is growing, gaining momentum, except for, unfortunately, with the effects of COVID, which we'll talk about. But before then, it was gaining momentum, and you can kind of see. Most institutional types have more WAC programs than not, with PhD granting universities having significantly more than not. While community colleges are less likely to have WAC programs, a significant number of community colleges do have such programs. The majority of program directors have been leading for less than 5 years, and a significant number of program directors have been leading for much longer. There are also a significant number of programs that have no director. I should also note that a great majority of program leaders are associate or full professors, but many program leaders are non-tenure, and many fall within the category of other. Those program leaders which fell within the category of other were diverse in academic rank. Examples of ranks included deans, provosts, and distinguished faculty. The majority of directors are the rank of associate full professor, but many are also non-tenured. The majority of WAC programs exist in institutions with a student population of 1,000 to 5,000, but many have also formed in institutions with more than 20,000 students. Most programs have formed at suburban and urban institutions, with rural institutions close behind. Online institutions report almost no WAC programs. WAC programs exist in a variety of places. Some programs even exist in more than one place. Some programs exist within a department, such as an English department. Other such departments are comparative media studies or writing departments, interdisciplinary studies departments, general education, and undergraduate studies. At least 10 initiatives identify as being part of a writing center. Other programs are part of the campus writing intensive requirement and a campus general education requirement. These latter programs often stand alone. So you'll see down here, the gold means yes, this program exists in that, or the initiative exists in that program. Blue means no. So you can kind of see the layout there. I also thought it was interesting to look at where the program is located, writing programs or English programs. You can see that the gold is independent writing program or department. The blue is English department, and the purple is both. So looking at this writing program outside of a department, you'll see the breakdown, and then writing program within the department. You can see the breakdown there too. Programs fall into a variety of categories. Often they fall into more than one category. Institutions more often than not identify their programs as writing across the curriculum. Those that claim this category for their programs also claim several other categories. So it was common for programs to be writing across the curriculum, but also have a WAC emphasis in the writing center, a writing in the disciplines program, a WI/GE requirement, and also a communication across the curriculum program. So all of those are kind of wrapped together. When an institution didn't identify the program as being writing across the curriculum, they often identified that program as being a WAC emphasis in the writing center, a WI/GE requirement, or writing in the disciplines. So these programs typically fell within a single category, and the most frequent were the ones that I've just mentioned. So you can kind of see the breakdown here. Again, the gold is yes, the blue is no, in terms of where these programs exist or how they're categorized. Now let's look at COVID. So when COVID came upon us, our institutions, our universities, our educational settings underwent great transformations. Here at Northwestern, we've been pretty much online for a year and a half. And of course, this impacted WAC-WID at several universities or educational institutions. And you can see here, there have been 67 responses so far as to how COVID has impacted WAC-WID at certain institutions. 23.9% of these responses say that efforts haven't changed, but 19.4% say that efforts have stalled. In fact, some programs note that they were close to perhaps getting funding for a WAC-WID initiative, but that funding is completely stalled. And then we have the red portion, 53.7%, are efforts that have been moved online. So a lot of programs note they're still going forward, they're still using WAC-WID, but they're doing it online. The same as a lot of different programs across the university setting right now. So, at least those ones are going forward. So those are the effects of COVID on WAC-WID efforts. Now let's look at what we're doing going forward. As I noted at the beginning, there is a gap in between the results of the survey. They were gathered over a 5-year period, but there was a gap in between 2016 and 2019 when I began again. Between 2015 and 2016, we received over 400 responses. Between 2019 and 2021, we are now close to 300 responses. My plan is to get us, or at least I'm hoping, to get us up to 400 responses, to get this project up to 400 responses. And then to compare and contrast 2015, 2016, 2019, and 2021. And you'll see that the 2019 and 2021 survey has that COVID questions. I really would like to continue collecting answers there, because I think that's something that's a really important thing for us to know about. How did this pandemic affect WAC-WID initiatives? I also want to point out there's a URL there at the bottom, and I'm just going to keep the screen up for, 20 seconds or so. So if you just want to copy that URL or put it into your browser, you're more than welcome to. And there's a survey there waiting for you if you would like to participate in the 2019 to 2021 survey, because we would love to hear from you. All right, well, as I said, I am Michelle Zignoni. I am at Northwestern University. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out. I can be reached at, and of course my email address is not there, so I'll give it to you right now. It's Michelle, M-I-C-H-E-L-E .Zignoni, Z as in zebra, U-G-N-O-N-I, at northwestern.edu. I'm with the Cook Family Writing Program. You can look me up there too. That email address isn't coming across as clear as I would like. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I am more than happy to answer any questions. I would love to talk with you about the survey or anything else WAC-WID related, writing related. And thank you for listening in today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me in my presentation titled Professional Small M-mobilities and Self-Ethnography for WAC Administrators and Teachers. In 2008, in The Art and Craft of Train Travel, Laura Watts embarks upon a mobility narrative of a train journey. On this trip, she asks, quote, "How do links between place get made and broken whilst on board a train carriage? What specific social and material relations and arrangements are involved?" End of quote. She shares snippets of observations via her notes from sandy train seats and passenger types to mobile phones and bridges, which she calls, quote, all the social and technological flotsam of train travel, end of quote. What appealed to me about her study was the attention to detail. It was personal while also capturing the essences of her mobility experience. She noted where she seemingly morphed from ethnographer to train passenger when she interacted with others and objects on the train. It also connected remotely to me because of a complex mobility I was experiencing as a WAC administrator and teacher on the move from El Paso, Texas, to a new job in Long Beach, California, while also immersing myself into mobility studies scholarship as a 2-year fellow at the Thomas Watson Conference on Rhetoric and Composition at the University of Louisville. In my talk today, I too will switch from ethnographer, theoretician, and WAC administrator and teacher on the move. Once I felt immersed in the scholarship, I began my mobility self-ethnography, attempting to document and discover some understanding of my professional and personal move. In time, I realized I would need to expand and create conceptual terms to understand my professional experiences, to reflect upon the complex movements that have always been all around me, while also being able to share these ideas with other listeners and readers. What started with Laura Watts's questions while traveling by train and adapted to my mobilities evolved over time into a conceptual mobility model, one that would, like Zhang and Toyota, attempt to, quote, delineate the interface between mobility and structure, end of quote, while also creating a mechanism that would readily allow WAC administrators and teachers from diverse geographical, professional, institutional, and family backgrounds to model their mobilities experiences so that we can begin to see similar patterns and differences. In a nutshell, I wanted to create a model that would capture our many shared personal and professional experiences, or small M mobilities. The idea is that with many small M mobilities stories, we can arrive at big M mobilities, ones that show patterns and similarities in our changing professional positions. The need to share, study, and learn about our professional mobilities seems long overdue. Without these narratives, we all keep jumping and moving around like disconnected blips on a radar. Let me begin by characterizing some ideas about mobility studies. Mobility studies is premised on movements, which are also subject to interacting movements of other objects and spaces, unpredictable outcomes, as well as stagnant or immobile variables that are in stasis, a stasis that, in turn, affects mobile bodies and elements in indeterminate ways. Leading mobility studies scholar Thomas Cresswell characterizes this indeterminacy as, quote, the slippery and intangible nature of mobility that makes it an elusive object of study, end of quote. Despite and because of mobility's elusiveness, I found it necessary to propose some framing elements, ones that still leave mobilities dynamic and keen to fluid space. The framing elements I developed here were necessary because as a mobile WAC administrator and teacher, I had to explore and somehow make meaning of my visible, invisible, and explored, unexplored mobilities while on the job market. As I developed these framing concepts, I kept Scheller and Uri's advice in mind. Quote, we do not insist on a new grand narrative of the global condition as one of mobility, fluidity, or liquidity. The new mobilities paradigm suggests a set of questions, theories, and methodologies rather than a totalitizing description of the contemporary world, end of quote. The first important variable I realized I needed to see was that mobility is what mobility scholars Zhang and Toyota call, quote, wind and woods, end of quote, and what most other scholars simply call space. As I reflected on their descriptions, I began to imagine myself in the cockpit of an airplane, because at the time, I felt like an airplane pilot getting ready to fly without any navigation or meteorological equipment. With navigation or meteorological equipment, pilots can preview the invisible space they will fly through, seeing wind currents, storm buildups, etc. It is from this preview that they plan routes they might take. At the same time, invisible features of sky and space transform into dynamic weather dots and wind formations that can signal to a pilot to replot and take new, unplanned routes based on actual conditions, or even never leave So while radars see movements in the atmosphere that the naked eye cannot, movements that become patterns, dangerous thunder cells, or shearing winds, we too need some form of seeing and observing in our professional mobilities. With this in mind, a conceptual tool I created for the study and project is what I call a mobilities model, which I like to think of as our radar. The idea is to have a consistent concept designed to help us begin seeing and sorting through all our unique experiences as we initiate our professional mobilities. The mobilities model evolved into three key applied concepts. 1, mobility stages. 2, contingent and emergent events. And 3, inertia starters. The results of these three applied concepts are what make up the mobilities model, and I will discuss each of these next. Mobility stages. A mobility stage is a guide we create to document the approximate places and dates that we anticipate accomplishing, or anticipated as well, accomplishing or completing during a period of professional mobility. Ideally, mobility stages will include pre-mobility places and dates, that is, anticipated and unanticipated places and changes that came about from unseen variables, much like our pilots. With mobility stages, we're able to describe and document changing and altering mobilities either while in motion or after the fact. It is important to note that notions like pre-mobility places and dates can be documented after the fact. In the case of a professional move like my own, it served me well to create some stages ahead of time. I did so for 2 reasons. The first served more like a list of things to do at projected times and places. These lists and orders underwent frequent changes based on unseen, unpredictable circumstances or the needs of others, like family. The second reason mobility stages became important is that they became ways for me to psychologically see I was getting there. For example, I could look ahead and see dates when I would be united with my family again, or when I filled in after the fact that I had planned something, but inevitable changes took place. The point here is that change is bound to happen. Mobility stages are dynamic. They can be planned, replanned, and unplanned. On close examination of mobility stages, then, they provide insights into how and where we, as mobility subjects, plan and alter our trajectories. Like blips on radar with changing weather and ground conditions, mobility stages do not and should not need to tell why these mobility plans and all their alterations took place, merely that they took place. I wish to stress that while it is easier to remember mobility stages while they are enacted, they can still be effectively completed after the event. Now, so I stress this for later, if for those of you who might want to participate and share your mobilities experiences, is that even if it's 20 years ago, you can still go back and from what you can recall this and then create the narrative from it. Now that I've reviewed mobility stages, I moved on to the second of our 3 concepts: contingent and emergent events. Mobility studies scholars have made it clear that they wish to connect with several disciplines that focus on static locations, people, and ideas. What Uri points out about sociology, it, quote, views the social world as an array of separate societies, bounded entities, or sedentary containers of geographical propinquity, end of quote. Other fields include classical geography, anthropology, and sociology. As I studied my own mobilities for this research, I realized, however, that abandoning static points or positions was unhelpful, and I had to understand an alternative way to think of static points or positions. Let me explain. I began to consider to and from points or positions as essential mobility locations for 4 reasons. First, if we are studying mobilities, we need to acknowledge them, because without them, we could not focus on specific, quote, space of flows, end of quotes, from Castells, or one mobility space and not others, because otherwise it would just be all mobility spaces. Mobility spaces, in order to be studied, need some form of point or boundary. For example, a canyon is not a canyon without canyon walls. The canyon itself is space framed by the bottom, sides, water, and top skies. In turn, small M-mobilities are framed by local experiences, such as job dissatisfaction and economic stagnation, and distant events, such as a school's job for a WPA, a rhetoric and composition specialist, or a composition adjunct. If we take these out of the space, we no longer have key architectural components for small M mobilities. Second, I began contemplating ways to capture the dynamism of what I experienced and perceived in my points or positions. I settled with contingent and emergent events. Reflecting on it afterwards, I feel contingent emergent events captures the complexity of our to and from starting points, even if these are political, lecture, or adjunct positions, or administrative, like the one I was trying to hold on to at Utah. While my autoethnography focuses on one person and his experiences, the angles that small M-mobilities asks us to examine could be helpful toward a better understanding of the movements of not only our large and growing contingent laborers within composition, but also the elimination of administrative positions, such as my Cal State Long Beach WAC program and directorship last May 2020. It is a job in itself to have to work to keep hold of positions that are prone to being ignored or let go with the signing of a pen. Most of our ostensibly static points, I argue, are made up of contingent and emergent events, like our home and work locations. The insistence in mobility studies that we need to understand the mobilities between A and B is still accurate and needed. But in considering the space between A and B, the only dynamic space, we negate the notion that A and B themselves are dynamic, fluid, in motion, perhaps even the space between wider sets of A and B, a canyon within a canyon, so to speak. Third, contingent and emergent events suggest an outer area, one constantly undergoing change. Our starting and destination points have the potential to be dynamic as the mobility space we study. To overlook the results in not seeing an additional dynamic to our space of flows and not realizing that our beginning and ending points as part of the whole are significant features for mobilities. Whenever a person or object begins, enters, or returns to a contingent and emergent event, the person or object in the contingent and emergent event experiences some form of friction from people or objects in motion, or people or objects attempting to maintain their static positions. Fourth, once we identify our key contingent and emergent events and where people are part of the object of study, we need to recognize that they have some attachment, good, bad, ambivalent, to the contingent and emergent events. This type of attachment I came to label as memorable. Memorable contingent and emergent events, ones that trigger notions of identity and place. Such attachments, for example, are how we actively remember, and which the attachment in order to maintain and reproduce it, thereby transforming the attachment and our identity in relation to it. Ideas coming from Tusting. While Altman and Lowe have depicted place attachment as the ways that people and places become connected, Steele defines sense of place as, quote, an experiential process created by the setting combined with what a person brings to it, end of quote. Memorable, contingent, and emergent events further clarify that they are composed of emotional attachments that, unless stated, would remain unknown to most people. In this way, the concept of memorable, contingent, and emergent events is a strategy to bring out the ways in which places are ongoing constructions. From my experience, I ended up seeing myself in relation to Utah and elsewhere differently, too. As someone who could leave work and work elsewhere was in demand, I started to re-envision myself. While this unfortunately sounds like a great thing, we sacrifice much in being itinerant. Living in California now, I see the contingent composition labor pool, freeway flyers, treated as throwaway, replaceable tools by the many universities hiring, firing, replacing them. From contingent and emergent events, we will become aware of what types of geographical contact mobility professionals experience, while also becoming more sensitive to geographical psychological connections they have in their contingent and emergent events. The first two stages set us up to delve into the third stage of the small M mobility paradigm. While stage one asks how we think about our movements, going beyond more than just the move itself, The second stage considers how fixed locations are actually mobile themselves, especially when we think about how places are constructed and effective. Next, inertia starters give us the full picture of what activities and events actually create mobility and are key to understanding the why of movement. Inertia starters, our last concept in mobilities. Juxtaposed from contingent and emergent events, which evoke specific psychological attachment to events, the following discussion of inertia starters teases out and reveals personal psychological, internal experiences with external actions. Informed by Scheller and Uri's fourth theoretical influence, inertial starters concern, quote, the recentering of the corporeal body as an affective vehicle through which we sense place and movement and construct emotional geographies, end of quote. Why are the objects or people under study where they are in the place of professional job flows? In my quest to answer this question, I arrived at a term I'm adapting from physics and aircraft engines. Inertia is, quote, that property of matter by virtue of which it continues in its existing state, whether of rest or uniform motion in a straight line, unless that state is altered by an external force, end of quote. This is from the Oxford English Dictionary. Inertia starter is a device used on engines before electric starters were invented. These starters depended on a person to spin a motor out of its resting state to a firing state, again, from the Oxford English Dictionary. For mobility, I view inertia starters as the sum of a person's thoughts, experiences, and actions coalescing with enough energy to enact, alter movement, or stop movement. Two categories of inertia starters became apparent, external and internal. Once contingent and emergent events were visible, I became aware that all mobilities need a reason to be, to come into presence mentally and physically. Laura Watts asks, quote, when does a train journey begin? As an ethnographer, it began with negotiating access and permission from the train operating company. But it also began with imagining the journey, imagining some moment of arrival in sufficient clarity that I knew I would need to stay overnight near the final station stop of Penzance, as we see in the image on the PowerPoint, end of quote. Watts's questions are what prompted me to dig wider and deeper in order to understand why mobilities begin and what inertia starters would look like. External inertial starters are what the object or person in mobility experiences from outside contacts. These might be positive or negative frictions. Friction is necessary to both stasis and movement. Think of, say, brakes. They keep something from moving, even though there's a lot of energy being expended. Cresswell's definition of a mobilities approach additionally fuels my thinking into external inertia starters. Quote, a mobilities approach considers all forms of movement from small-scale bodily movements, such as dance or walking, through infrastructural and transport-aided movements to global flows of finance or labor. Understanding these things together adds up to more than the sum of the parts, end of quote. In seeking interconnections, ones that hinder or enable, I saw how these forces could actually serve as potential propellants. Likewise, I wondered what role musings and internal dialogue played. Internal inertial starters are generally psychological and unseen, yet they are experienced long before any movement takes place, and, as I now see, are instrumental to movement. Once the role of internal and external inertial starters became clear, I realized that Watts' journey on the train had begun long before she accounted for it. I became aware that my own movements started before any visible movement took place as my understanding and insight into what I wanted personally and professionally became clear. My inertia starters, while still in contingent emergent Texas and UTEP, had internal and external inertia starters that would eventually determine and propel my mobility. My professional dissatisfaction with UTEP administrators arose partly as a consequence of conflicting trajectories. I wanted a top-notch program. They, it seemed, wanted to keep the program in stasis, quiet and in its place. My internal inertia starters derived from my experiences at contingent and emergent UTEP, and later in the process from contingent and emergent CSULB. There was jockeying from internal inertia starters manifested at UTEP that combined with external inertia starters, email and phone communications from CSULB or Cal State Long Beach. These created an admixture of forces for possible mobilities. In my current location in Long Beach, I am now among a large contingent composition labor force, and I'm regularly saddened to hear and see their indifferent treatment. While many similarities to my small mobilities exist, their small mobilities experiences, once told and documented, could unite into big immobilities and narratives, serving as inertia starters for humane and valued treatment. These admixtures show us how mobility studies can expand our thinking of routine moves and displacements for composition professionals. In my present account, this also helps to explain my UTEP administrator's failures to respond to my request for funding for a documented need for additional tutors, online tutoring equipment, and staff training, to name a few. They may have imagined that the needs of the University Writing Center were temporary and therefore could be ignored, unlike the need for, say, a medieval literature or accounting professor, since these and the curriculum requiring courses in them are believed to be stable, part of the enduring landscape of the institution, and higher curriculum requiring courses in them. Perhaps more importantly, from this mobility perspective, we can begin to make sense of why those of us in WAC and rhetoric and composition need to pay attention to mobility studies. What do some workplaces do to retain employees they have invested deeply in, and others that seem indifferent to turnover and disruption, as in our fields? It is important to note that, like DeMello and Sahay, I did not set off with or adopt an a priori methodology making meaning of my collected and remembered information. As they suggest, quote, a set of themes was inductively involved through an ongoing process of engagement with the data. From my reflections, correspondence, conversation with friends both during and after the move, and my internal dialogues, I observed a set of themes inductively evolve into this small immobilities paradigm. Experiences at UTEP. I spent 14 years at Periphery UTEP. I became a full professor, created a successful PhD program in rhetoric and writing studies, created one of the busiest writing centers in the country, created WAC initiatives, served as dissertation and thesis advisor for more students than the other faculty member in the rhetoric and writing program, and was the leading scholar for the PhD program. While this may sound like a great setting and experience, my successes were not rewarded or compensated. Inertia starters help answer Ravel's call for, quote, theorization of the role of infrastructure, end of quote, in creating a desire to be mobile. While administrators or other institutional factors can cause inertial starters, my experience is that it oftentimes takes a combination of external and internal inertia starters to cause mobility. Several internal inertia starters were affecting me. On the one hand, the UTEP University Writing Center went from having approximately 5,200 student contacts per year when I started as director, that would be visitors, to over 12,000 contacts or visitors per year, and then over 3 years, so 36,000. Student and faculty assessment of our services, previously none were done, no assessments were ever done, were excellent. The same was true of our WAC initiatives from the UWC, a separate innovative dissertation writing system program for all PhD programs on campus, and new live online tutoring. Despite more than doubling our numbers in excellent assessments at an open admissions undergraduate school and PhD program school, our funding remained stagnant. I made countless visits with my chair, dean, and provost. All were pleased with the results and reporting, and readily used these successes for their own needs. But when it came time to recognizing success for our undergraduates and graduates at Periphery UTEP, with an increased budget to hire more tutors to handle the demand and to open on weekends and evenings, my campus bosses started ignoring my emails, or more commonly practiced what I came to call the art of delayed avoidance. The delayed avoidance, or the art of delayed avoidance sequence, was something like the following. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If I don't get back to you in a couple of weeks, contact me again. I'll look into it. I'll meet with the dean and get back to you. I didn't have a chance to bring this up with the dean at our last meeting. Maybe next month, I promise. I'm sure many of you have experienced replies like these and the canceled meetings. They keep us at bay, and they did for me for weeks, then months, and finally years. Be an example of friction, thinking of again of the brakes and the tires spinning and smoking, but cars not moving. As a matter of fact, these responses became interchangeable on any subject with the administration at Periphery UTEP. For me, they became internal inertia starters. In a nutshell, I felt disbelief and dissatisfaction. My second goal was to begin looking into the issue of salary inequality at UTEP, the most quietly known and talked about subject on campus. Dis and misinformation was a subject everyone felt a victim to. Add this to the known administrative approach to giving more funding for projects to company players, that is, those who are quiet and blindly pledge allegiance to administrative mandates, which always start from the top. UTEP's president was in her position for 30 years at the time and had cohorts of administrators she shuffled from one post to another, even outside of their specialization. Texas is an open record state, meaning things like state employee salaries are public information. There was a salary book that was kept for decades in the reference desk at the library and could be checked out by anyone at any time. These are not available for free or accessible online. To make matters worse, the UTEP provost moved this resource from the library to his office and made anyone who wished to see it check it out with him, and that it remain at his office. Intimidation was the rule of thumb from this ever more secretive and distanced provost. To my dismay, despite academic successes equal to or exceeding my colleagues, I discovered my salary was worse than I thought, almost half of what my peer full professors were paid. And even one associate professor in my field, one who I hired as part of the committee. I gathered my local salary information, looked at national salaries, created reports with charts, and made my appeals. In my attempts to talk with accurate and documented numbers about what I knew was egregious, the replies were exactly the same as those I received for my quest for assistance from the UWC. After almost a year of attempting to meet with my chair, she finally met with me about this, took my report, and said she would look into it. Several months later, she announced to all English faculty she was doing a study of salary compression for all faculty, but it would take some time. Salary compression is a term that I heard fairly often over the years, my 14 years at UTEP, and nothing ever changed. At least maybe it did for some people, but again, everything was quiet. Silence ensued for 8 months until we had another report that confirmed my findings. However, the message was then to begin looking at all faculty, and that would take time. To my knowledge, that was never done, or at least shared publicly. I had to accept that my two primary institutional needs, one, more funds for the University Writing Center based on documented successes, and two, salary equity, would not be satisfied, even though I tried to use facts to support my requests over years. My internal inertial starters were active as a result of my frustration, and finally realized I would not succeed in either area. So one afternoon, I updated my resume. This made me feel better, a shot of self-esteem from all my work, my hard work, and yet worse too. What the hell? What's going on? And the Routledge Handbook of Mobilities captures my inertia starters. Quote, and in all these cases, becoming stuck, being bogged down, or being detected may also be a crucial event, end of quote. On a personal level, with my salary over the years, I found it hard to manage a 5-year family. On the one hand, my two needs at Periphery UTEP were in the open and well known, but they were unrecognized as important. For me, on the other hand, my internal inertia starters were ones no one at Periphery UTEP knew of, or my family or close friends, but they were fuel for any possible future inertia starters. Just as a vehicle needs a ready fuel source to move, we too need inertia starters to begin our possible mobilities. If I could not cause change locally, I would need to consider the job market. As with all mobility experiences, there has to be a to and from a periphery destination. What needed to happen was an external inertial starter, like another institution looking for someone with my credentials, a periphery in waiting. I saw an ad for a WAC director at Cal State University Long Beach, and shortly after that also received an invitation to apply. This created more inertia in my mind, hopes for a more rewarding job, recognition, and better lifestyle for my family. After I sent my application materials to Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach was still not a periphery, as a campus visit hadn't happened. A few days later, Cal State contacted me for my recommendation letters. A few more days later, contacted me and wanted to interview on Skype. As all job candidates know, making cuts is a long process, and the route is even longer to an actual job offer, negotiation, and acceptance or rejection. After my Skype interview, I was invited for a campus visit to periphery Cal State Long Beach. Each step toward an offer serves to increase our internal inertia. While all these steps were taking place, Cal State Long Beach, to the contrary, had been examining resumes, letters of recommendation, letters, and writing samples. These all served as possible external inertia starters for the Cal State University Long Beach hiring committee. If we move forward at each step, our application materials must be effective external inertia starters. March of that year, I flew from periphery El Paso to Long Beach and Cal State University Long Beach for my 2-day and 2-night campus visit. The itinerary was standard. All the visits, presentations, class teaching, and so forth. The evening before my departure from Long Beach, on the way home, I recall that I really liked the feel of Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach as well, the faculty, and that I could see my family living there. Yet I knew other candidates still had to visit, and there were local candidates as well. So I kept my enthusiasm at bay. What I realize now, however, is that my feel for Long Beach would serve as an internal and external inertia starter to share with my family. The chair of the English department at Cal State Long Beach phoned me a few days later, extended an offer, and asked if I was still interested. After replying yes, I was informed I would be talking to an associate dean to negotiate a contract. The job search had now stepped into external inertia starters, and that an oral offer had been extended. In my case, I next shared the breaking news with my family, who knew when the process started 45 months earlier and knew something from my campus visit. But the reality of a move seemed distant at that time. Meanwhile, I also started the negotiation process with now periphery CSULB. When I received the offer from periphery CSULB, I was elated. And yet now know other factors would come into play. I now realize that family talk at such a juncture brings in several external inertia factors. These external inertia factors were toward moving or not to periphery Long Beach, or remain static in El Paso because of the disruption and changes it would cause. As we look back to when we had talked about this job, we all realized that many external inertia factors had changed. My wife, Claudia, and I have twins who were just about finished with their junior year in high school. They each were seeing someone. They were in many activities at school like band, guard, speech, and debate, and all with big commitments to many other people at the time of the offer. How could they leave all these friends and commitments? After much talk and debate, we decided that the twins would finish their senior year in El Paso, and Claudia would keep her job at Loreto Academy as a Spanish teacher for another year. It would be a quick year, we thought, mistakenly. At that time, I justified in my mind that we would all be so busy in school that we would be okay. It did not cross our minds that even though we would be busy, we would miss each other as much as we did. And this would later serve as an inertia starter to later return and visit El Paso many more times than what we had planned in my mobility stages. My mobility stages were for me to drive, my initial mobility stages were for me to drive to periphery, Cal State Long Beach in August, fly back every 2 months, and drive back at winter and spring breaks. These talks all took place while I negotiated with periphery Cal State Long Beach. A key detail here for mobility is that my mobility could have stopped the friction of place if we had decided not to make the move because of the kids' school and the many unseen complexities. A story no one would know, as many of you have experienced. My phone negotiations with periphery Cal State Long Beach were pleasant. I had a solid offer and a hard copy contract that needed to be signed. This was an external inertia starter that was put into motion from my internal inertia starters. Before I signed the contract, before I signed the contract with Periphery CSULB, however, I knew I had to speak to Periphery UTEP administrators about the offer as a professional protocol on my part. I had 2 weeks to apply to the contract. It was clear Periphery UTEP did not expect me to leave. I had kids in high school, friends in the community, and my wife had a teaching position. We must be prepared as job candidates to remain if all the internal and external inertia starters are not enough to put our mobilities in motion. I began what I assumed was the professional protocol process by emailing the dean at Periphery UTEP with the news that I had been extended an offer as full professor and WAC director at Periphery Cal State Long Beach. I would like to meet with her to discuss my remaining at Periphery UTEP. After a few days, she tersely replied, quote, "See Joyce," the pseudonym for the chair at the time, "about this." End of quote. That was it. This hit me as unconcerned since she was the one who needed to make any decisions about a counteroffer at Periphery UTEP. This response served to validate the experience that caused me to be proactive and amenable to a move. In that email, the dean CC'd my chair. Since the chair had been CC'd, I decided I would not contact her. If UTEP wanted to retain me under equitable circumstances, she would need to contact me. This would be a clear sign if they really wanted to retain me. 1.5 weeks went by. With 2 days remaining, my chair wrote to me as if it were funny, quote, "We should probably get together and chat about this. Contact Ceci," her administrative assistant, "to set up a meeting," end of quote. I did so, and we met in the morning on the day before my contract was due. At the meeting, we exchanged pleasantries before sitting at the table in her office in Hudspeth Hall. Quote, "Geez, John, we sure would hate to lose you. I'm not even sure we'll be able to compete with anyone. What are your needs?" End of quote. I presented what my needs were, what I had been presenting to her attention the last few years. 2 things, a salary to match my colleagues and my program, and a budget to match the success and student numbers of the UWC. Even though I had done all the research on salary inequality and had all the data on the UWC, her immediate words were, quote, "I don't think we can do anything. The budget is so tight, John. I can talk to the dean, but I doubt if she'll be able to do anything," end of quote. I reminded her I needed to reply to Periphery Cal State Long Beach the next day. However, I realized while still seated that Periphery UTEP was no longer viable. Before I even got up from my chair, I would leave Periphery UTEP. I had to. Even with an offer on the table from Periphery Cal State Long Beach, UTEP administration was stagnant, motionless on the one hand. On the other hand, it relied on my commitment to place to serve as friction to hold me back. I suspect many schools rely on this as well. The chair was unprepared to do anything, which also meant the dean was the same. If she had said, "I met with the dean and here's what we can do to begin the counteroffer negotiations," I would have respected that. That did not happen, and I knew I would be right back in my frustrated position at UTEP. The chair and dean's lack of responses and preparedness served as additional external and internal motivations for me. I left our meeting, went to my office 1 floor up, and wrote an email to Periphery Cal State Long Beach that I would accept the contract we had negotiated. A new stage had been put in motion. While there was no visible mobility yet, my mobility stage with a destination was now ready to be noted. A week later, the dean from UTEP emailed me that we should get together to talk about trying to come up with some sort of counteroffer. I emailed back, quote, "Thank you, but I accepted the wonderful offer and position at Periphery Cal State Long Beach. I will submit my resignation by the end of the week. Sincerely, John." It became clear from this mobility stage of my experience of what I suspect are similar to other job candidates' experiences, that these internal and external inertia starters are essential to understanding and studying our mobility movements. Understanding that these inertia starters inform possible movements and trajectories, but do not fully determine them, will guide us to better understanding of the more visible mobility movements, answering why a writing professional is or was in mobility. Moving forward, an important key with the mobilities model is that we have common concepts, vocabulary, and a starting point to a common methodology. Otherwise, we end with what Cresswell advises us to avoid, telling, quote, stories to each other with no relevance beyond their own confines, end of quote. My goal is that this mobility model is one that other WAC teachers and administrators will feel they can become a part of, no matter how long ago or recent their movements were, how near or how far their job was, or what their positions were or are. Once we have collected a number of rhetoric and writing professionals and WAC professionals' mobile models, we can then begin the process of examining the forces that cause and drive complicated uprooting and rerouting. Cresswell laments that, quote, movement is rarely just movement. It carries with it the burden of meaning, and it is this meaning that jumps scales. It is this issue of meaning that remains absent from accounts of mobility in general. And because it remains absent, important connections are not made. And rightly, end of quote, and rightly so. Our observations could prove useful for future professional movement decision-making and make the connections and meaning that Cresswell calls for. Perhaps naively, my additional wish is that our experiences will help administrations to understand what professionals like us give up and what we gain, as well as the poor personnel and financial decisions they have been making, over and over again. That concludes my talk for today. If you are not here at the talk, I'm happy to take questions now. If you are here at the talk, I'm happy to take questions. If you're watching the talk before or after the conference, I'm happy to answer any questions you have by email or Zoom.